Next up on Extraordinary Faith, a show which presents the extraordinary richness of Catholic liturgy, art, and music. Come with us to the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, where we'll stop by the Church Music Association of America's Sacred Music Conference. We'll meet the people behind the world-renowned music program at St. Agnes Church. We'll visit one of the first churches to introduce the Tridentine Mass after the Vatican reauthorized it in 1984. And we'll take a tour of the magnificent Cathedral of St. Paul, a liturgical lesson in stone. Hello, I'm Alex Began, welcoming you to Extraordinary Faith, a program that celebrates and explores the classic forms of Catholic sacred art, architecture, liturgy, and music. We're coming to you today from the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, where we're attending the Church Music Association of America's conference on the renewal of sacred music and the liturgy. We'll take you inside some of the Twin Cities' historically significant churches, and we'll meet some of the people behind the thriving Catholic parishes here. When I was driving through Bavaria in southern Germany recently, I was struck by the number of small towns that were dominated by a Catholic church rising high above every other building in the village. Likewise, the Cathedral of St. Paul is located at the top of a hill. It's visually a landmark seen everywhere in the city. Inside, the cathedral is rich in symbolism of veiling the sacred. The first symbol is the communion rail, which separates the sacred actions that take place in the sanctuary from the profane actions that take place in the nave, where the congregation sits. The second element is the tabernacle, which they've chosen to locate on the center of their high altar. Note that their tabernacle has a veil on it, again shielding the sacred Blessed Sacrament from the outside world. But most significantly in this building, they've chosen to build a magnificent stone baldacchino over the high altar. The baldacchino serves one purpose only: to shield the sacred actions that take place on the altar, that is, the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and the reserved Blessed Sacrament. Like many of the world's great cathedrals, the Cathedral of St. Paul has an ambulatory behind the main sanctuary. It's called the Shrine of Nations. Inside, there are 6 side altars dedicated to the nations that built the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. But these aren't just devotional shrines. They're actual functioning side altars originally intended for the priests of the cathedral to celebrate their daily masses. Because they're twin cities, it's not surprising that Minneapolis has a co-cathedral to the Cathedral of St. Paul, the Basilica of St. Mary. While they're not identical twins, there's certainly a family resemblance on the exterior, and as you're about to see, on the interior as well. We're here with the Director of Liturgy and the Sacred Arts, Johann von Paris. Johann, let's start and ask you, what is the reason why a church is designated a basilica?
Well, the title of basilica is actually granted to a church by the Holy Father, and it can be for a number of reasons. One reason can be that the building is particularly beautiful, great architecture. Another reason can be because the liturgy is celebrated well, because it's a place of pilgrimage, because it's an important parish in the history of the church. And it's sort of like the Queen of England knighting a person. The Holy Father gives this title and then attaches that particular church almost to himself. So if the Holy Father were ever to come to this area, protocol-wise, this is the church that he would have to visit because this is his church in the area.
Now, this church is also the co-cathedral of the Archdiocese. What does that mean practically?
In 1966, the Archdiocese of St. Paul became the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. And we have the cathedral in St. Paul, the original cathedral, and then the Basilica of St. Mary became the co-cathedral. And interesting to note also is that both cathedrals actually were built by the same architect, Emmanuel Masqueret.
There are some very interesting architectural details in this basilica. Let's start with the two symbols of a basilica, which we notice back there. Could you explain them for us?
Absolutely. So when you go into a church and you notice a half-open umbrella known as the umbrellino, usually red and yellow colored, striped, and on the other side you notice a little silver bell known as the tintinabulum, you can say, that must be a basilica.
One of the most striking architectural features in here is the construct around the high altar. Could you explain what that is and what it's called?
It's called a baldacchino, and the reason for it being so large and so beautiful is because it is constructed to say, this place marks the most important place in the entire church.
Then I noticed that surrounding the side walls of the church are confessionals, but they're not your typical confessional. These are made out of stone.
Indeed, and the thought behind it is that the sacrament of reconciliation needed to be emphasized, and Monsignor Reardon wanted to do it by creating little churches. So if you look at them, they almost look like little churches. They even have a small dome on top of them. And so to emphasize the importance of the sacrament amongst this big building.
Above us, we see some incredible stained glass. Are there some stories in these panes of glass?
Oh, indeed they are. The basilica is dedicated to St. Mary. It's not surprising then that the stories that are depicted are the stories of the life of Jesus, but through the eyes of Mary. So if you look at each one of the windows, you will see that Mary is represented at the side of Jesus along his life. The lower windows are figures taken from the Old Testament mostly, prefiguring what's going to happen in the story that is narrated in the windows above. In the little roundels, you have angels holding a scroll, and on the scroll is a verse of the Litany of Loreto. So the entire Litany of Loreto is also in the windows.
Johann, thank you so much for being our tour guide here today.
My pleasure.
And we hope some of our viewers can join you here in the Basilica. In the 1970s and 80s, few churches embarked upon a liturgical program that incorporated Latin, Gregorian chant, and sacred polyphony. Minnesota's St. Agnes Church embarked upon this kind of a program with vigor, even to the extent of offering full, grand orchestra masses on a regular basis throughout the year. Let's meet some of the individuals behind this ambitious traditional parish life. This is Father Mark Moriarty, pastor of St. Agnes Church. Father, thanks for having us here.
My pleasure.
This has to be one of the most elaborately decorated churches in North America. What can you tell us about the origins of this architectural style?
This church was built by German immigrants 100 years ago, in fact. Just last year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the laying of the cornerstone. It is modeled on Austrian architecture, which takes a little bit from the west and a little bit from the east. For example, the spire has a little bit of an onion dome, so it reminds you more of the east, yet the rest is Romanesque. It is not Rococo, so it's not too flowery, but it would be called Baroque.
Now, it's impossible to talk about the history of St. Agnes Church without talking about its late pastor, Monsignor Richard Schuler. What can you tell us about this unique priest?
This priest was given a great gift by God in regards to music. Monsignor Schuler formed the Twin Cities Catholic Chorale, which has just celebrated its 40th anniversary here at St. Agnes. And with his musical sense, his musical taste, and his understanding of the great, rich, beautiful tradition of the church, he wanted to make sure that the rich heritage of the Renaissance period and afterward, especially with orchestral masses, were used in the context of which they were meant, and that is the holy sacrifice of the Mass.
Now, in this parish, you offer the ordinary form in English,
Correct.
the ordinary form in Latin, and the extraordinary form. What is the motivation behind offering these diverse worship styles?
In short, we have the great gift of being able to offer the fullness of the Roman Rite. As Benedict said, the extraordinary form and the ordinary form are two forms of the same rite, and we're able to offer them, obviously the extraordinary form only in Latin, but the ordinary form in that traditional liturgical language, as well as vernacular, and often those other masses, of course, we have little hints to the liturgical past, and of course that's Latin, Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew with Amen and Alleluia.
Church Music Association of America has a long and illustrious history of promoting the use of classic sacred music in the liturgy. One of its leaders today is Dr. Jennifer Donaldson, who just so happens to be the organizer of the conference that we're attending here this week. Jenny, congratulations on putting together this international group of talent. Tell us what the Church Music Association of America does.
The CMAA is interested in promoting the Church's desires for sacred music for her children, for promoting music that is truly beautiful, that is sacred, that draws people's hearts to God through beauty and art. And they do this in a number of ways. There's every summer a sacred music colloquium, and it draws hundreds of people from around the US and actually around the world now. And we meet for a week, and we have an awesome week of singing, chant singing polyphony, hearing lectures on sacred music, working on the organ, and enjoying fellowship with other people who are working for the same cause around the US. We also publish a number of things. We have a lot of reprints of chant books that had gone out of print, and we offer them online for free, but also as inexpensive books that are practical for the parishes to use in the promotion of sacred music, so that they have resources that make a truly sacred music program possible in every parish. One of the goals of the CMAA is to have truly sacred music in every parish in the United States.
At your conferences, what sort of people tend to attend? Do you have to have certain types of musical expertise in order to come?
There are all sorts of levels, and there's something there for everyone, which is really amazing about the colloquium.
Tell us about the project that you were involved with in Bismarck, North Dakota.
I was the music director for a summer institute for young adults called Ecclesia. And it's a month-long institute that provides intensive formation in theology and philosophy. Young adults from ages 18 to 35 came from all over the US, and we're at the University of Mary this summer. We had sung masses every day, mostly ordinary form masses, and as well as 2 extraordinary form masses. Another thing that I did that was really exciting was that I introduced to people sacred music and the traditional Latin Mass.
I'd imagine for some of those young people that was their first exposure to traditional liturgy. What was their reaction?
Overwhelmingly positive. I was so gratified to see that what I love and work for in the church was loved by the people that I presented it to. Some of them were open to it out of a sense of obedience to the church, and then once they were open to it, they experienced how beautiful and wonderful it was and how it really did help them grow in their faith. Others were attracted to it simply because it's beautiful and it's like the splendor of God showing through in earthly forms. That's what the Church Music Association of America works for. That's what I work for. That's what so many sacred musicians in the US and around the world are discovering, is that God is a God of love and a God of goodness and truth, but he's also a God of beauty, and he draws souls to him in a very profound way through beauty. And that's what I was so excited to be able to present to those young people. And I think they really understood that. They saw how their love for Christ, coupled with the church's traditions, which are so beautiful and amazing, can really draw people who know nothing of God or nothing of the life of the church back to the church or into the church for the first time.
In 1984, the Vatican's Congregation for Divine Worship issued a document reauthorizing the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass worldwide. One of the very first parishes in North America to take advantage of this new permission was St. Augustine Church, here in South St. Paul. Father John Eckert is pastor of St. Augustine. Father, we're coming up on 30 years of your hosting the Tridentine Mass here in St. Augustine. What can you tell us about how it all got started?
It started small. It started monthly. A parishioner who was driving past went up to the rectory, asked the pastor if they could start the Latin Tridentine Mass under the indult. The pastor was agreeable, asked the Archbishop, and it started out first Fridays once a month. and went that way for the first years, and then expanded to Sundays and holy days. And then when the motu proprio of Pope Benedict came out in 2007, well then at that time I was pastor here, and we began offering the Tridentine Mass on a daily basis and on weekends, and all sacraments for that matter, in both forms at both of my churches. I fell in love with this Mass when I was a little boy, and I wanted to be a priest since the youngest age. In fact, I think I can bring it down to age 5 that I remember wanting to be a priest. And it was this Mass that inspired in me that desire. My parents were in the choir, and so I was in that church in the choir loft, loved the sights, the smells, the bells, loved that Mass. Was not trained in this Mass, but then about 14, 15 years ago, started offering this Mass here at St. Augustine.
Now, one of the things we noticed in the Twin Cities is that there is a thriving Latin Mass scene here. So we've noticed that St. Agnes has a Mass, All Saints does, maybe other places in the suburbs. To what do you attribute the growth of the Latin Mass here in this region?
This was the original church and the mother church, and then some of those priests who are now offering the Mass elsewhere had been assistant priests here or had assisted with this Mass, and then as they become pastors, they've been able to make that available, and we found that the faithful are there as well. Now, what happens is, you know, when we were the mother church for this, or the original one, people would sometimes have to travel a great distance to come to Mass here. We had one gentleman who would travel 500 miles. He would come from the Dakota border, 250 miles each way to attend this Mass. What's nice is now geographically, as it spreads, it's being made available in various parts of the archdiocese and the state and the nation, for that matter. And so now the faithful have closer opportunities and more choices with regards to Mass times.
Is there any particular age group that seems to be attracted to the Mass?
Actually, the younger folks. And we have many families, we have many crying babies at Mass, and so some might think it would be a nostalgic thing where you get the older folks. We tend to get the seniors and the young families who are drawn to this. That would be the two largest groups, but especially the young people.
Father, thank you so much for welcoming us into this important church in American Catholic history.
Thanks very much. God bless.
One of the most striking aspects of the traditional Latin Mass is that it's in Latin. That raises all sorts of questions, especially for those of us who aren't all that skilled with languages. Joining us is Dr. John Pepino, a professor of Latin at Our Lady of Guadalupe Seminary in Denton, Nebraska. Dr. Pepino, let's start off with a very basic question.
All right.
Why use Latin?
That's a very good question. Indeed, if language is meant to communicate, why is it that the liturgy is said in a language that people don't necessarily come in knowing? And there are several answers to that question. The first one, of course, is that Latin is the language of the Mass in the West from as far back as we can find texts for the Western liturgy. And it has remained the language of the liturgy in the West because it was the one language that was international and that could be used everywhere in those days. Another reason is the bond of unity that it preserves among peoples of different languages all over. When a traveler, let's imagine a traveler from Berlin who goes to France and then to England and then to Chile, to China, to Africa. If he goes to the cathedral or whatever church there is there where the Mass is said in Latin, or until recently any Roman Mass, he would know exactly where the proceedings were, what was being said, and he could join in voice with his Catholic brothers and sisters from anywhere in the world.
Now, does a Catholic have to understand Latin to participate in the Latin Mass?
Oh, my heavens, if that were the case, no, not at all. Most people who go to the Latin Mass don't know much Latin. Some are working on it, and in generations past, those who went to the Mass, of course, didn't know Latin at all. I think it would be a mistaken notion to believe that attendance at Mass requires the understanding of every word that is uttered there. In the end, the texts themselves only constitute a small part of what the liturgical action is. That my own recommendation would be to just go in there go in the pew and allow this action to sweep you up into this whirlwind of worship and chant and liturgical movement, call and response in Latin and so forth and so on. Don't be focused on understanding everything. It isn't a lecture, it's the liturgy. And it's as though you're looking at a window into heaven, you won't get it all.
Now, speaking of knowing the language, I have to ask, is anybody today capable of speaking Latin conversationally? And if so, where do they do it?
I know, it sounds a little bit crazy. It's like speaking some Ugaritic or ancient Cretan dialects or something. And yet, yes, the answer is that there are places and people where this happens. It happens in monasteries. There are Latin-speaking clubs. I read in a French newspaper just this summer that in Paris there are people who meet to speak Latin. This happens all over the US, both church people, by the way, but even outside of strictly church concerns, in secular universities like at the University of Kentucky and other places too, where there are people that for whom Latin, as you listen to them, you'd think, well, this is this man's or this woman's native language. So yes, it does happen, and it's beautiful to hear it spoken, and it's really something remarkable and very exciting. So yes.
Dr. Pepino, thank you so much for helping us understand that some things are truly timeless.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed.
We're here with Dr. Virginia Schubert, president of the Twin Cities Catholic Chorale and Orchestra, the group that provides the music here for the Masses at St. Agnes, and also by Dr. Bob Peterson, its music director. Now, Bob, let's talk about the use of professional musicians. That's not something that many parishes undertake. What are some of the advantages of doing so?
Well, first of all, I guess I'd like to begin just by telling you that it's not just something that we like to do. Doing 30 works a year, we have to have professionals. Just so you know, the orchestra does not rehearse. They are among the best professionals in town. Minnesota Orchestra, St. Paul Chamber, the finest players, some of them the finest players in our country. Their music is ready for them. They take out their instruments and they play it really very much without error. The choir, on the other hand, rehearses 2 hours once a week. I work them very hard to usually do 3 major works in one evening.
Now, you sometimes do Gregorian chant masses too, from what I can tell.
The Schola, during all summer long and during Advent and Lent, when we don't sing, they sing a chant mass every Sunday at 10 o'clock. So they fill in, because there is a Latin High Mass in this church every Sunday of the year.
Are there any lessons you've learned that you think you could teach other parishes that are either starting music programs or trying to upgrade theirs?
This is our commitment to the greatest music ever written for the Catholic Church. And the unique part is that we do it in its actual setting of the Latin Mass.
St. Paul, Minnesota's St. Agnes Church is home to the only K-12 school in the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis. We're here with Donna May, the music director of the parish and the school. Also joining us today is Megan Roddy, a junior at St. Agnes School. Donna, this is a very unique school. You have an emphasis on the sacred arts here that one doesn't normally see. Could you give us your take on what goes on here?
The students at St. Agnes have a music program from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Our school makes a tremendous effort to integrate the faith in all of the curriculum that we do, and it is through sacred art and music that we try our best to accomplish that.
Megan, you and your peers are bombarded with popular culture and popular music. How do you get interested in a classically oriented repertoire like this?
I think you are raised with it here at St. Agnes. I've been here since I was in first grade, so I've just always listened to the Renaissance music here. And I think it's a popular thing in our school to just be interested in music and be interested in the arts, and they really promote it.
Now, I assume that your choirs sing a substantial amount of Latin repertory, because that's what you do here at the parish. You're known for that. Megan, do you have to take Latin classes before you were able to sing in Latin?
Yes, Latin classes start in grade school, where they teach you the basic prayers in Latin, like Hail Mary, Our Father. Then in junior high, you take Latin, or you could take Spanish, and that is also another option for high school language. That is a requirement for you to graduate.
As an inner city school, we service close to 60 or more zip codes. So students come to us from all over the area. They come to choir because they want to sing, or they want to just take the requirement. And so I teach them the pronunciations if they've never had Latin before.
Do you have any suggestions for other music educators who may be watching this program who might want to start their own children's choirs? How could they do that?
Children's choirs are the lifeblood of a parish. That's where you can teach them, and they learn even through osmosis. They just are like sponges. So it's important to, first of all, have the support of your parish priest and to get a feel for your parish. Where are all young families attending? What Mass are they going to? Recruitment is extremely important, but keeping in mind what your mission is absolutely foremost. I love what I do, and I wouldn't change my career, my vocation. I look upon it as that for anything. I teach the faith through music. And if you can get parents and other children excited about the faith because they can sing about it and know that it is honoring God and it is of quality and is not just a passing fad or trite, you can have a successful program. They will come because all of us have a yearning in our souls for what is good, true, and beautiful, and we can find that right here within our faith.
Donna and Megan, thank you so much for joining us.
On our next episode, we'll hitch a ride with a bus tour pilgrimage to Chicago, Illinois, which hosts the largest number of Latin Masses of any diocese in North America. We'll meet some of the impressive young people behind the restoration of Catholic traditions there, and we'll talk to Bishop Joseph Perry, who travels far and wide to celebrate the extraordinary form. We'll also visit some of Chicago's gloriously restored historic churches. Hop aboard and join us next time on Extraordinary Faith.
There's more information about every church we visit on our website, extraordinaryfaith.tv. There you'll also be able to ask questions and participate in our forums. Thanks for joining us on our journey to St. Paul, and join us on our next one as we continue to explore the beauties of historic Catholicism here on Extraordinary Faith.